Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Horror Mine. My name is Vic Shy, and this is the Scare Score, where I break down horror movies and rate them on how scary I think they are. In this episode, I'll be going over the 2021 South Korean horror film, Ghost Mansion. I'll be going over the events that take place throughout the film while rating the scares on how scary they are or attempt to be. I'm not the biggest fan of anthology horror films because they can be all over the place. This one genuinely surprised me, but how scary is it? Sit back and relax and join me as we explore Ghost Mansion and tally up the Scare Score. Our movie begins with a voiceover from our main character saying he should have never come to the possibly cursed Gwanglim Mansion. The film zooms in on a tape recorder and we hear an eerie distorted sound before the film's opening credits. The opening credits give off the vibes of a horror television show, which is sort of fitting because the film is divided up into chapters telling different stories that loosely connect to one another. Each chapter is based on different residents living inside of the Gwanglim Mansion. The first chapter is titled The Writer. We meet our main character Ji-woo, a webtoon artist exploring the supposedly cursed Gwanglim Mansion as inspiration for his work. This isn't a traditional mansion and is more of a large apartment complex. He goes inside and hears strange noises directly above him. We see the spirit of a little boy behind him who disappears when he turns around. He meets the mansion's caretaker and asks him about the strange rumors surrounding the mansion. He says there was an orphanage at the mansion years ago. A fire started and the adults left all the children behind to perish in the flames. Since then, people started hearing strange noises coming from the unit. We see a man who lived in room 504 listening to the sound of children playing directly underneath. The man is a novelist and is being shown the unit by a real estate agent who lives on the 7th floor. The agent calls the novelist pal and the novelist awkwardly tells him, "I'm not your pal, buddy." The novelist rents the unit and can't seem to focus on his work. He pours himself a drink and hears running footsteps coming from below. He gets a call from his wife where we learn he's experiencing some marital problems. She says that their 1-year-old son has been crying for him and I haven't stopped ever since. While arguing with his wife, his laptop screen rises on its own.
진짜 미안한데 너 정말 말 족같이 한다.
The call disconnects and he notices his laptop open. This was a good scare scene that definitely caught me off guard with the unnerving voice change. I also really like the setup of the mansion caretaker telling the ghost stories happening in different units. It immediately created an eerie atmosphere that is felt throughout the entire film. The next day, he goes to a pharmacy for a headache and a young man comes in asking for mold remover. This is the moment I knew that the different stories would loosely connect through these brief interactions. He gets a drink of water and his laptop disappears from his desk. He hears a child laughing and a door opens on its own behind him. He goes to close the door but finds a child's shoe on the floor. He takes a closer look and his laptop falls from the ceiling before a child quickly crawls out of the apartment. He goes out into the hall but the child is gone. This was a really good scene that had effective scares in broad daylight. What makes the scares really work here is the great sound design. He asks the caretaker to review the cameras but nothing is seen on the video footage. The novelist is rightfully upset given the situation but does a good job in maintaining his cool. Just kidding, he's actually a pretty unlikable and miserable guy, but thanks to the storytelling, he won't be the focus for much longer. He decides to go to Unit 404 himself and let these ghosts know that he has tenants' rights and won't stand for this. Unit 404 seems totally abandoned aside from several children's shoes on the floor. He comes up with an ingenious plan to throw away all the children's shoes located in the cabinet right outside the unit. He's super proud of what he just did. My dad is great with children. That night, he is woken up by a loud noise and his bedroom door opens. I also could have sworn this was a ghostly face in his blanket, but I'm pretty sure I was just seeing things. He bravely goes out to check, whereas I would have just stayed under my blanket and watched brain rot until the noises went away. The bag of shoes suddenly appears behind him, and it was at this moment he knew he fucked up. A ghost child eerily stands in the dark before running into his room. Someone aggressively knocks at his door and a super creepy tune starts playing. He looks through the peephole and sees the ghost of 3 children standing outside his door with their backs turned. They slowly raise their heads and point to the ceiling before we get a pretty predictable jump scare. He falls back into a pile of shoes and probably regrets being such a dick to a bunch of kids and his own son. The ghosts of the orphanage children appear directly above him and consume his soul off screen. This scare scene had a couple of cliches, but it was a very solid way to cap off a pretty scary segment. Again, the sound design is excellent and carries a lot of the weight in making making these scares effective. The reveal of the children's faces was pretty bad though, as they didn't look scary at all. Aside from that, I really enjoyed the writer's segment, and I think it's a strong start. Back in the present, Jiwoo remembers his girlfriend telling him about the writer whose name was Lee Hyung-hoon, a famous novelist who went missing 2 years ago. The caretaker plays a reverse Uno card on Jiwoo and starts asking him questions. We learned that his previous webtoon called Spooky Horror flopped, which leads into the next chapter titled The Pharmacist. The caretaker says the pharmacist, who stays in room 907, was a pretty woman who was dating a man she should have never met. She gets out of the shower and we hear a radio news broadcast about a man who deleted his wife and daughter and fled the scene of the crime. She gets a call from her mom and lies to her about having a boyfriend. I didn't know people had to lie about being single. I just am. She looks at a picture of her boyfriend and a creepy tune starts playing on the radio. The novelist comes into her pharmacy asking for medicine, showing the neat little connection between segments from a different perspective. Her coworker sneaks up on her and we learn that the pharmacist's boyfriend is actually married, making her yet another character with unlikable traits. She gets a call from her boyfriend named Ho-jun, who is breathing heavily and ominously says that he'll come by tonight. The same coworker then comes in through the front door, showing that the pharmacist was speaking to a spirit earlier. That night, Ho-jun comes over and says that his wife found out about the affair. From that statement, the direction this segment is heading becomes a bit obvious. The pharmacist wants him to get a divorce so they can live happily ever after. He asks her to let him stay here and to not let anyone know. While they sleep, the shower turns on and her bedroom door opens on its own. The creepy radio tune is playing from the bathroom and the radio is missing from its spot. She then sees a silhouette through the glass of someone just standing there. Because privacy means nothing nowadays, she quickly opens the bathroom door, but no one's there. This was a very solid scare scene that sets up a very creepy atmosphere. The sound of the running shower and the radio tune playing as she slowly approached the lit bathroom created some great tension. I could have gone without the super loud sound effect when the silhouette was revealed because I don't think the scene needed it. The next day, 2 detectives show up at the pharmacy and tell her that Ho-jun is the suspect in his family's murder. She realizes that he is the man that the news broadcast spoke of earlier. She comes home to Ho-jun in the shower and sees his bloody clothes on the ground. He repeatedly says not to tell anyone he's taking a shower here in the same exact tone, but she doesn't notice. She is too busy panicking and trying to come up with a plan for them to disappear together. She finally realizes that something isn't right when the creepy song starts playing on the radio. We see Ho-jun's silhouette dancing to the song before turning around to face her in a pretty menacing way. Someone knocks on her door, which turns out to be Ho-jun casually acting like nothing's happened. He calls her cell phone and she lets him in, thinking he's the real one. They both see his imposter in the bathroom dancing and asking her not to tell anyone he's there. Now, something that I don't think I've ever touched on before is the difference that an extra character can make in the scare factor. What's taking place is still scary, but having Ho-jun walk in and see exactly what she's seeing brings a sense of relief, which makes what's about to happen that much scarier and brilliant. Ho-jun slowly approaches the bathroom armed with a hammer. Right as he is about to open the door, he says that he told her not to tell anyone he was there. She now realizes that dating a married man has real-life consequences and the room suddenly becomes covered in blood. Ho-jun is now bloodied and holding his deceased wife by the hair. We could actually see his wife's spirit in the red coat standing right outside the pharmacy earlier. She looks on in absolute shock and horror as the spirit who's been tormenting her appears blurred directly behind her. The final shot of the segment is of Ho-jun smiling deviously with blood on his face. This was an excellent scare scene and a great way to finish a solid segment. The fact the pharmacist was given a false sense of security before her demise made the reveal scarier and a lot more sinister. The visual of Ho-jun's silhouette was really effective and clever, especially when they both looked at her at the exact same time. Chapter 3 is titled The Realtor. Jiwoo's investigation into Gwanglim Mansion leads him to the realtor we met during the first segment. The windows to his office are covered and he is cowering in fear under his desk. We get a brief shot inside of the realtor's unit, room 708, showing his sink completely sealed off. We see him shopping for a bracelet while his employee exposes his unethical work practices. He compares being a realtor to going on a blind date. He tries to show the best qualities of the unit and hide the bad as much as possible. He shows room 504 to the novelist and tries hiding the clogged sink. He goes home and has dinner with his wife, who turns out to be the creepiest aspect of the entire movie so far.
괜히 반말하고 그랬겠어? 응? 그죠?
That doll has one of the most unsettling faces I have ever seen. She looks like something straight out of a creepypasta. He gives her a new bracelet and her head eerily falls backwards. The realtor sleeps with his doll sitting on the side of his bed and is woken up by the noise of water coming from the sink. He tries unclogging the sink with his hand and his finger gets cut on something. He then pulls out the strap of his lovely zebra printed man purse. He hires a plumber who discovers a large clump of woman's hair stuck in the drain. He looks up the previous tenant's information and intends on making them pay for the damages. He gives them a call and hears something disturbing on the other end. I really like this brief but unnerving scene. The confused and scared look on the realtor's face before he hangs up is just perfect. Now that the sink is fixed, he sets his sights on solving his next issue, repairing his lovely wife. He wraps her in a plastic bag and prepares to ship her out. His sink becomes clogged again and his doll disappears when he turns around. The water suddenly turns off and he sees a hand wrapped in long black hair coming out of the sink. He looks under his feet and sees his wife's bracelet on the floor. Really effective scare scene that, just like the previous segments, uses its unique scare device to generate some genuine scares. In this case, the doll combined with the clogged sink. The realtor now looks exhausted, like he hasn't gotten any sleep. His coworker mentions that a high school girl recently passed away at Guanglim Mansion, most likely the same girl we saw during the writer's segment. That never has its own segment, but shows just how dark and sinister that place truly is. Rumors are that the mansion was built by Guanglim Church, who had a cult-like leader. The realtor knows all about the dark rumors surrounding Guanglim Mansion, but continues to bring in numerous new tenants. I understand that it's his livelihood, but he is also an extremely shady and weird individual that doesn't feel any remorse about what he's doing. He has a one-sided argument with his doll, who has truly mastered the art of active listening. There's just something about her face that is extremely off-putting, and just when I thought he couldn't be any weirder, he's now pretending that he's going on a first date with her. The sink makes another noise that makes him turn, and when he looks back at the doll, her head is turned to the side, as if she also turned to look at the noise. He looks back and sees the doll's head wrapped in plastic poking out of the sink, covering her face. The doll falls behind him and we get a predictable jump scare as the other doll comes out of the sink. He dashes into the bedroom and we hear the noise of the plastic as the doll approaches the door. The doll knocks on the door and the lights go out. He pulls out his trusty lighter and frantically looks around the room before stepping on the doll's plastic bag. There is a brief moment of silence as the doll's now smiling face emerges behind him. A really great and intense scare scene to close out yet another very effective segment. What really makes this scene work is the psychological horror the realtor is also experiencing from seeing his doll come to life. This is an item that he is very fond of, but as crazy as he is, he knows it should not be moving. The realtor has since moved out of Guanglim Mansion and retreated to his office. Seeing that the windows are all sealed up, it's possible that his cursed doll is still tormenting him. Although he is still alive, his hands are now amputated and he is permanently traumatized. It's possible that his life was spared because he directly contributed many souls to the mansion. Chapter 4 is titled The Student. Ji-woo uses the stories from Guanglim Mansion to illustrate a new webtoon. He takes them to his publisher, who loves the stories but says they are just too short. Ji-woo's girlfriend Dahae reminds him of his birthday and asks him to stay home and celebrate. We haven't seen much of his personality up to this point, but he becomes immediately unlikable by telling her to go away. It's clear that his only motivation is to become successful and make money. He returns to Guanglim Mansion and begs the caretaker for more stories. A student named Tae-hoon returns from studying abroad after failing to get into college. He doesn't have anywhere to go and temporarily stays with his friend Jae-suk, who lives in room 604. He goes inside and notices the unit is covered in mold. The two childhood friends have lunch and Tae-hoon notices several warts on Jae-suk's face. All the food appears spoiled, but Jae-suk has no problem eating it. Tae-hoon is already weirded out and tries texting his other friend for another place to stay. Jae-suk asks him why he chose to stay with him despite having many other friends. It's obvious that nobody else allowed him to stay and that Jae-suk was his only option. He turns around and sees Jae-suk creepily staring at him without saying a word. He wakes up to Jae-suk vacuuming the apartment and saying he can eat whatever he wants from the fridge. This includes complimentary spoiled milk and rotten fruits. Continental breakfast. He then notices mold on the wall in the shape of a person. He gets mold remover from the pharmacy and we get a montage of him cleaning the apartment. He scrubs the person-shaped mold from the wall and some of it gets stuck on his finger. He forces his way into a locked room that is is completely covered in mold and contains a creepy picture of Jae-suk and his parents. Jae-suk comes home to a clean apartment but freaks out when he sees the mold is gone. He says, "How dare you do this to my mom and dad," and tells him to bring them back. Taehoon decides it's time to bounce and calls one of his friends who doesn't even remember him. The call drops before he can get the address, and a person-shaped mold suddenly appears on the ground. He takes a closer look and the mold starts to look more like ashes. An Enderman-looking spirit is watching him in the corner of the room and quickly disappears. He goes back into the room with the portrait, which is now covered in moving ashes. Jae-suk appears behind him and says that his parents are angry. He reveals his disgusting-looking face, which is covered in more warts and sticky black goo. Taehoon is grabbed by several hands straight out of the painting as Jae-suk goes into the room and shuts the door. Aside from a couple of brief creepy images, this segment was not scary whatsoever. It's the shortest and the weakest segment of the entire film. Ji-woo asks the caretaker about Gwanglim Church and if the mansion is truly cursed. The caretaker gives him a key to room 1504 where he can witness the truth for himself. The final chapter is titled The Caretaker. Dahae eats Ji-woo's birthday cake alone, which is pretty depressing. She listens to his conversations with the caretaker, but it sounds like Ji-woo is just talking to himself. He takes the elevator and a weird man is just facing the corner. The man keeps saying hello but doesn't turn around and Ji-woo ignores him. He looks back and the man's head is now slightly turned with a really odd smile. The lights start flickering and the man slowly starts walking towards him. Ji-woo frantically tries to open the elevator, which appears stuck on the 9th floor. All that energy spent on frantically pressing the button should be spent on closing his eyes
and swinging wild haymakers until something lands.
He finally gets out and the weird man stays in the elevator smiling as the doors close. I think this scene tries a little too hard to be scary and it doesn't feel as intense as it should. The strange man then appears down the hall and delivers a package before delivering a chase scene. He is not messing around and is straight up running after Ji-woo like the T-1000. Somehow, Ji-woo manages to outrun him and hides inside of a locker. The man walks past the locker before we get a super predictable jump scare. His eyes start to bleed and he lets out an unsettling cry before disappearing. This was a pretty meh scare scene. Aside from the unsettling visual of the man crying blood, it doesn't really offer the scares or tension it's trying to create. Ji-woo enters Unit 1504, which is completely covered in talismans. He is drawn to a closet and finds a tape on the floor. He plays the tape, which contains a message from the caretaker.
자네가 이 소리를 듣고 있다.
He confesses that he is not the mansion's caretaker and previously came to the mansion in search of something. He and the strange man were thieves looking for money supposedly hidden by the Gwanglim Church. They go to Unit 1504 and the man named Hee-dong hears bells ringing behind them. The not caretaker reminds Hee-dong that he needs the money for his mom's surgery. They break into the unit, which is completely dark and covered in talismans. Hee-dong looks at the closet and sees some sticky goo similar to what was on Jae-suk's face earlier. I think that the hair belongs to the doll, possibly meaning that the horrors tormenting the residents of Gwanglim Mansion are coming from this closet. The terrified Hee-dong just wants to leave, but the caretaker won't leave without the money. They find a sheet covered in script that is covering the mummified body of the cult leader. His leg is chained and wrapped in bells, the bells that Hee-dong heard in the hallway earlier. They pull a key out of his mouth, which unlocks the closet door. The caretaker opens the closet, which appears to be nothing but a dark, empty void. He reaches inside and pulls out a handful of money. He starts laughing and filling the duffel bag with cash. Hee-dong hears the bells ringing from the other room and the caretaker suddenly disappears. The bells keep ringing, but the cult leader is still on the table. Hee-dong decides to finish the job and take as much cash as possible. He then sees the cult leader standing directly behind him. He carefully aims and dashes for the door, but it won't open. Strange goo drips from the ceiling and we get a jump scare before Hee-dong runs out of the apartment. He gets into the car but realizes he doesn't have the keys. He hears the bells ringing before the caretaker suddenly appears and gets in the car. He saw inside the closet and asks if Hee-dong also wants to see inside. He looks down and sees the cult leader's foot before the spirit appears right in front of him and takes him out. This was a decently scary scene, but overall not a very scary segment. segment. Everything with the cult leader and the bells was somewhat effective, but it's a trope that I've seen too many times before. It also doesn't help that it's a short segment, so everything happens too fast to be truly scary or meaningful. Ji-woo turns off the tape recorder before the caretaker can reveal what he saw inside the closet. The closet door opens on its own and we hear monstrous sounds combined with tormented souls crying in agony. The cult leader suddenly appears behind him and scares him into the closet. The caretaker walks in and says he enjoyed the time he spent with Ji-woo.
자네가 그리울 거야.
He walks away laughing deviously as Ji-woo begs him to open the door. Before he walks out, he turns into Ji-woo as the real Ji-woo is consumed by the darkness of the closet, bringing us back full circle to the film's opening scene. A pretty menacing thing to have happened, but nothing really scary. Da-hae goes to Gwanglim Mansion looking for Ji-woo. She goes into the caretaker's office and hears the same sound Ji-woo heard when he first walked in. We also see the same ghost child standing behind her. In the film's final scene, the evil spirit of Gwanglim Mansion walks out in the form of Ji-woo as the movie ends. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was Ghost Mansion. My friends, this was a really enjoyable horror film that had some excellent segments. I'm not the biggest fan of horror anthology films because they're usually all over the place tonally and can make for a very uneven experience. While the last two segments weren't very scary, they were still enjoyable and didn't bring the entire film down. Although I do think that the student segment was the weakest and the film would have been better off without it. With that said, this is definitely one of the better horror anthology films I've seen. The first three segments were very good and had some genuinely frightening scare scenes, earning Ghost Mansion a good scare score of 67%. I definitely recommend y'all check this one out as I think it's the perfect movie to watch with spooky season right around the corner. The scariest scene in the film is when the realtor's doll comes to life. I became unnerved the moment that the doll's face appeared on screen. There's just something so off-putting about her face, and she is by far the creepiest thing about the entire film. But as always, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Thank you all for tuning in, and I cannot wait to see y'all right back here in the horror mine. Y'all stick around.